Hello, everyone. Welcome, Base Live. See everybody just hopped on. Thank you so much for joining today. I am Liz Prue, VP of Marketing here at Base. If you are new to Base Live, these are our free weekly events that we host here in our Base community, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. We're just happy to put these on for you. Today's topic is uncovering your value, how to feel empowered in your work and advocate for yourself with Jessica Vann, the founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group. Hello, Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Liz. Such a pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. We're so happy to have you. And if you are, again, new to Base Live, we love to take questions from the chat. So be sure to drop any and all questions that you have in the chat, and we will get to them throughout the discussion. And we'll have Q&A at the end as well. I see we have folks from Santa Barbara, St. Louis, Chicago, Montana. Hello.
Montana.
I don't think I've seen Sue here before. Hi, Sue. Welcome, and apologies if you have been here before. I see some familiar faces. Hi, Carrie. Love it. This is awesome. So I'm going to do a quick intro for Jessica for those of you that haven't met her before or aren't familiar with Maven Recruiting Group. Maven Recruiting Group is a renowned recruiting firm specializing in connecting high leverage EAs and support staff to the nation's most prominent executives and companies. And as an active thought leader and advocate for the admin community, Jessica hosts Reach, which is a podcast for executive assistants. And I'm going to drop the link in there for you guys and in the recap email so you have it as well. And this podcast has a goal to empower EAs with information and inspiration they need to create meaningful opportunities and value for themselves. So thank you so much, Jessica, again, for joining. We have tons of questions from our audience, but I'd love to give you just a couple minutes to say hello, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can dive into some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for the nice intro. As Liz said, I am Jessica Vann. I started Maven Recruiting Group a little over, 11 years now. And we're a Bay Area based company, although what does that even mean anymore, right? Everything is remote and we're all disbanded anyway. But we're a Bay Area based company specializing in primarily executive assistant roles. And we've had the privilege of working with some incredible entrepreneurs and founders and leaders and CEOs over the years, and really helping them to identify game-changing support and really understanding, what defines game-changing support. So it's been a true honor to work with really the innovators of business today, and simultaneously to be able to work with this incredible community of executive assistants and to really understand and I think, help people evolve in their thinking of how to support, what support means, what defines great support, but also really about empowering people to understand their value and their influence. And I think that's really kind of what has distinguished us and what's really excited and energized us about launching the podcast and really being able to support this community is actually helping people to embrace their power and embrace their influence. So that's been really the driver and a source of a lot of fulfillment for us as a company.
I love it. And I think that that's why we're so excited to host you here today too, because those topics that are a little bit more vulnerable and offer a little bit more transparency, I think we don't see that a lot. We've seen it a little bit more over the last year now that everyone's just been at home and things have gotten a little more real, I think.
Yeah, a lot more real.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you weren't kidding. I think, and that kind of leads me into our first topic around, we always hear future-proofing your role. How do I future-proof my role? And, what we usually hear, technology, like obviously here at Base, we talk about that a lot, or ongoing professional development, education. But I'd love to see, particularly because you help place a lot of these folks and find talent, what skills do you think right now are just essential? If you haven't, other than the basics that every great EA has, and if it ranges by industry, we can dive into that too. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on just here's what a winning EA is doing right now.
Totally. Like, and specifically in kind of a post-COVID or COVID environment, right?
Yeah, I think definitely, because it's changed everything, and not just,
Absolutely.
we're seeing now too, like it's changed that forever. Like it was at first, it was like, okay, this is what we have to do right now. And now we're seeing that it's becoming a forever thing.
Yeah. And I think that you're touching on a really vital sentiment that a lot of people have been struggling with, which is that feeling of vulnerability and that feeling of kind of like insecurity, right? I think that this was a very humbling and startling experience for many. And I think that to the extent that, you know, if your definition of providing value and being an assistant was really limited to things like travel and things like conference room setups and management and shuffling appointments and you know, rearranging calendars and expense management, I mean, for the large part, a lot of that stuff did kind of go the way of the buffalo, right, for a little bit, and it hasn't really come back. And so I think that, to your point about what do we need to be thinking about right now, I think it really is about taking a bigger picture view of what the position of an executive assistant is. So it's like sitting up a little taller in our chairs and actually saying to ourselves, okay, how do I fully embrace this, right? Like, what else can I be doing? So I like to think of it as, you know, the job has become not just looking at the plate of your executive, but actually looking at the entire platter, right? Like, we've got to have our eye on absolutely everything. And so I think instead of taking a reductive view and taking a very kind of linear definition of what your job is, it's actually coming at it from this level. Sorry, I talk a lot with my hands, so I hope that will be okay. But it's looking at it from this perspective. Yeah, it's gonna get exciting. Right. It's thinking about all of the different facets and all the different components. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, I think a lot of things have come to light in this time that maybe weren't a priority before, but are still like very much a pressing priority right now. So that could be things like relationship management, right? How can you help your executive at this time really keep a pulse on key relationships, key people in their inner circle, helping to identify problematic areas that maybe you, because you are so good with intuition, with having those soft skills, with having those EQ skills, maybe you're picking up on things that are problematic, right? Or kind of a blind spot that the executive may not see. And you're elevating that and you're saying, hey, I kind of got a vibe about so-and-so in that last meeting. Like, how have we checked in with him? When's the last time, the last time you had a one-on-one was a couple months ago. When's the last time you actually sat down with them? Would you like me to go ahead and take some time for you guys to do that? So it's helping to be an extension in really helping to manage those relationships. I think it can also be about, things like helping them to prioritize their own wellness and well-being, right? Looking at that, evaluating that. Have they actually made and taken the time for themselves? It could be things like looking at, I think communication has been a real challenge in this environment. So it no longer works that most of us can just kind of bump into each other or have casual conversation. For those of us that are working remotely, we have to be very intentional about how and when we can connect with one another. So it's looking at things like that and saying, are the right people in the room, so to speak, right? And what does the room even mean anymore? So it's gathering people and making sure that there's not silos or pockets of information where not everybody that should be briefed and in the loop is actually in the loop. So it's taking a look at things like that. I also think it's about being adaptive. And I think that there were a number of things that worked in a pre-COVID environment. For instance, maybe your company had these, epic 2-hour weekly meetings to kick off the week, right? Monday from 10 to 12. And maybe there were croissants involved and it was great. And it was like this great camaraderie thing. But maybe doing that in this environment doesn't really work, right? And so I think it's also like evaluating, are these things that we used to do, are they still serving us? Or do we need to rethink about these things? Do we need to tweak them? Do we need to modify? Do we need to adapt? I think business as usual that's a foregone concept that doesn't exist anymore.
That's such a great point that I think whenever really in any role, and I say this all the time, I always try to equate like I mean, I'm a marketer, but I find so many parallels in terms of like advocating for yourself and trying to up level the skills that you're offering. And so often we think, what else can I be doing? What else should I be doing versus what shouldn't we be doing anymore? And sometimes taking away is 10 times more impactful than continuing to try to like add on more activities or try to make that 2-hour Monday meeting work when, like you said, it's no longer serving anyone anymore. Someone has to do e-learning, someone has to do this, or even, it's just you're at home. The other thing, your schedule is different. Your mind, no matter how much you try to separate work from home, if I hear the laundry go off or if I hear my dog I can't tell you how many times my dogs interrupt my day. Just because you're at home and it's so much harder to try and focus. That's a great point. I love that.
Yeah. And I think a 2-hour chunk of time in a home-based environment is a much bigger ask than it was in an office environment, to your point, because there's all of these other bells and whistles and stimuli that you have to respond to.
Right. Absolutely. So as we talk about advocating for ourselves and how you advocate for yourself at work when there's so much change happening, and then last year we've had the phase of adapting to this insane pandemic. And then it's like, okay, work from home is going to be for a while. Okay, now we're hybrid. Now we're not. Are we full-time in the office? Like there's still this constant change. How do you advocate for yourself in an environment where that may not feel like it should be the priority? Just because there's so much else going on. How do you do that on a regular basis? Or maybe an example of asking for a raise or asking for a more accommodating schedule. I think advocating for yourself can be, or maybe we talk about what exactly does that mean, advocating for yourself, and then we can dive into kind of how you do that.
Yeah. So I think to answer the second part of your question first, what does advocating for yourself mean? I think it means fundamentally about embracing your value and understanding your value. I think that particularly with this candidate population or this population of employees, I think that they tend to, on the whole, not always, but on the whole, I think that they tend to sometimes devalue what it is that you all bring to the table. I think it's both the beauty of the personality type that's drawn to this role. It also speaks to their sensitivity and their humility and their desire to please and nurture and help others, which are beautiful, wonderful qualities. And I think sometimes as well, the advocacy and the recognition of their own value and power is a little bit less easy for them to connect to, right? So it's like, opposite sides of the same coin. So I think first and foremost, it's really like embracing that. And it's saying, God, like I really provide a meaningful service. And we've said this a lot on our podcast. We hate the word just, right? When people come on and they say, oh, I'm just an EA. Or I'm just this. And I always joke and I say, okay, have you ever heard a heart surgeon say, well, I'm just a heart surgeon? I'm just a heart.
Okay, as women, we stop saying that. And I've heard this before. Women need to stop saying
just drop the word. Like there really is. I can't think of a single situation where I would use the word just. Let me think for a second. I'm just making spaghetti for dinner. Like, no, actually, that's pretty baller. Like, you're making spaghetti for dinner. I think that's fantastic that you're making spaghetti for dinner. So I can't think of a single situation where I think that the word just has any value. So I think we need to drop it. We need to expunge it from our vocabulary. So first and foremost, it's who am I? What do I do? Let me be proud of the work that I do. Let me recognize that because of this good work that I'm doing, these are the things that are able to happen. My executive is in motion. My executive is in orbit because of all of the incredible initiatives, projects, distractions, hassles, time management, all of the leverage that I'm providing. That is enabling this to happen. So you have to start there. You can't start. I think until you really own that, you don't get to really understand, how to advocate for yourself. Now, the other part of your question, well, how do I do that when all of these other things are going on, Yeah. I mean, I think that to your point, part of the skill and the ultimate success that you're going to have in any kind of negotiation situation is also about timing and knowing your audience and being sensitive to what the different variables are that are going on. So if your company has been one of the companies that has been absolutely devastated by COVID, and you know that your executive is fighting for funding or fighting to keep the doors open, or you're battling the worst, year you've ever battled, yeah, there is a timing element here that's probably not going to work in your favor, right? So I think first and foremost, you need to understand the context and put some perspective around that. But on the other hand, if that's not your case and that's not your situation, then I think that it's the same things always apply, right? It's approaching the conversation from, I think first and foremost, approaching it from the perspective of, okay, let me gather my facts. Let me gather my information. So these are the things that I've worked on. These are the different successes that we've had together. This is what I was able to help you achieve. And remind people, right? People forget. They forget sometimes the incredible things that you helped them to accomplish. So it does, it's helpful to have kind of like, like companies have their press pages, right? They have their accolades that they accumulate. Do the same thing for yourself and offer that as kind of evidence of your value. But I think it's also really important to start with the reassurance and to kind of reassert your commitment to that individual of, hey, I'm committed to you. I'm happy here. I want to be here. I'm passionately excited about the work that we're doing. I'm excited about the impact that I'm able to have. Give them that comfort, because no one is going to feel inclined to give a raise or a promotion or whatever to somebody who they feel like is not truly invested and embedded. I think that they really need to feel that solidarity with you to want to go there, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely.
And I think too, like getting your facts. So one of the things that oftentimes we get is, we have people reach out to us on both sides of the fence, by the way, the employer, the hiring manager, and also the candidate. And they'll kind of, covertly say, hey, I'm up for a salary, I have a performance review, or I have my annual review. Like, can you give me some market comp on this and this and this? What should a C-level EA who's managing an admin team be commanding in this environment? And we'll give them that information. And same thing with those executives. And sometimes they're talking about each other. They don't even know it. They're reaching out to us. They'll ask for the same thing. Hey, I want to give so-and-so a promotion. What is appropriate? What do you see for somebody in this space? What could they be getting on the open market? So have your information prepared, not in a kind of draconian, like it's my way or the highway kind of a way, because nobody likes that. But, I don't think you want to use your data as a weapon, right? You don't want to like weaponize the information, but you do want to offer it as, this is the information that I was able to come by. I did my legwork. This is what market is for someone in my position. And just put it out there. It's like you do with anything else as an EA. You give them the information, you frame it up, and then you say, now make your decision, right? But you make it easy for them to make that decision because you have proactively gathered all of the components that they need to evaluate.
It's it's making it a no-brainer. Like I've already made the decision for you, and here's why. I just need your confirmation. I saw Courtney on, YouTube said that their boss calls that putting points on the board. So you can easily just point to the board whenever you need to. I love
exactly.
That.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we all need to be doing that. Keeping kind of a wins list, right? Whether it's for your current job and it's something that you want to reference in a negotiation or in a performance review, or it's for your future job and you want to have kind of talking points as you're preparing your resume, as you're preparing for that interview. It's so easy in just the being inundated with life. It's easy to kind of forget all of the things that we've done along the way. So keep that cheat sheet.
I was going to ask too, I'm going to put it up here. I'm curious how many of you watching have annual reviews or have this opportunity to, I'm always surprised, but whenever someone says, oh, I don't have an annual review, I have a one-on-one. And I'm like, no, those are two totally different things. if you have the opportunity to present these, like at a review or not. And that kind of leads into our next topic. We had a lot of people write in questions around working at a startup or working at a tech company. And you've worked with a lot of these folks or VCs, and curious if these skills differ from any other industry. Having worked at several startups myself, I can definitely say, yes, there's a cultural difference from the pace, even skills required. So I'm curious for your thoughts on the administrative side. In a SaaS world, what does that look different that when you're matching talent?
Yeah. I think that there are definitely some distinct differences, both in terms of what the clients look for, but also in terms of like experientially what you can expect to get out of working in a startup, a larger tech company, a venture capital firm, private equity firm, or what have you. I think that if I had to kind of like top of mind, think about what our startup clients are looking for, the things that come to mind are, adaptability is huge, versatility of skill set. So again, depending on the funding level and kind of how early they are in their organizational life stage, versatility could be more or less prevalent. But in general, I think that kind of pinch hitter philosophy or mentality is absolutely vital, because there isn't someone in place for every single function. And so more often than not, these roles get really hybridized, and somebody who's willing to lend a hand and contribute in multiple ways, and also who's comfortable, right? Who's comfortable saying, I've never done that, but I'm going to figure it out. Or they have that kind of resourceful gene, and they actually really enjoy those situations where they're thrust into something that they've never done, or where there is no playbook. So, not having a playbook and being good with that is huge. I think stamina is a big thing. People talk a lot about that, about kind of volume, intensity of environment, stamina, kind of like that kind of athlete conditioning in a way, right? Of like, can you hang? Are you going to be able to keep pace as long as we're going to need you to? What else? Flexibility, willingness. I think a lot of it also pivots around passion. Founders of startups, this is their baby. This is their thing. This is what they've been dreaming of, working at, tinkering with, promoting. So they want to know that you believe in it as much as they do. They want to know that you get stars in your eyes thinking about it just like they do, right? I think that there's a huge thing. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a startup founder select a candidate who was on paper less qualified for the job, had less, kind of the pedigree, so to speak, but they had that fire in their stomach. Like they had that fire in their stomach. They had that energy. They were like, I'm ready to drink from the fire hose. I'm ready to bring it. That kind of thing. It speaks volumes to a tech founder. We actually did an episode in season 1 of Reach with Kristen Beetham, who has a lot of startups under her belt, and her most recent startup was working for the CEO of Jewel. She talks a lot about kind of the qualities, and I think it's also like going back to that whole thing of adaptability, right? Like knowing and being comfortable with just the constant change, and knowing that you might work grueling hours, heads down for 8-9 months, prepping for something that the next, 8 months from now, they go, actually, that's out the window. We're not doing that. We're scrapping it and we're doing this. And you have to be good with that, So I think that she shares a lot of insight, firsthand insight, that I think is really helpful in that discussion. But, tech companies, how is that different? Again, it kind of depends on the stage, but I think tech companies, a lot of it comes down to volume. A lot of it comes down to kind of complexity, navigating large organizations, navigating complex organizations, different sets of communication challenges that come with that, different sets of cultural challenges, and how do you assimilate different, departments and different cultures and different countries and different time zones. And it's a different kind of melting pot as you get larger. I think it's like, kind of PO numbers and vendor lists versus like being super nimble, right? So can you follow a process and things like that versus like, are you creating the process? So those are kind of some key differences. Venture, there's a lot of different venture companies. I mean, some venture companies are, I think, tend to prioritize more of that kind of professionalism, that kind of poise, that kind of really polished communication, very, very, very high service orientation. Those are things that they tend to look for. But there's also, venture capital companies that are a lot younger, scrappier, that might feel and operate a little bit more like a startup. But on the whole, I would say that venture is a lot about high service orientation, going above and beyond, accuracy, precision, meticulous follow through. It's really being able to project an outward polish and poise to the broader world.
We have a couple questions. One from Kara on YouTube. Kara said, since the EA role is hybridized in startups, how do I best balance knowing I will probably be taking on responsibilities outside of the traditional role while still fighting for fair comp? That's a loaded question, Kara.
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back first, if I can tee you up a little bit on what you're saying, it's first expectations, having that expectation that comes with the role, that comes with, comes with the role in a startup environment.
Yeah, it does. And I think that there's grades, there's gradations, right? So I think it's also, to your point, Liz, setting expectations and saying, hey, executive, I'll give you an example. I dealt with this with a candidate very recently where she was brought on as the executive assistant to the CEO of a Series A startup. It was never shared or disclosed or expressed to her that she would also, in addition to being the executive's EA, be asked to be the office manager and facilities manager for a massive space that they took ownership of, right? And at the end of the day, she wasn't down with that, right? I mean, for her, her work week went from being a 50-hour work week to being a 70-hour work week. And not only that, but now she's fielding calls at, 1 a.m. when the alarm system goes off for whatever fluke reason, and she's got to respond because now she's in charge of the facility and everyone's, treating her like she's got to kind of, be the fulfillment person for the office, right? So it was a disconnect with what she was expecting. And so the conversation that we had was really around kind of setting some expectations. And I think it starts, the best and most effective way of setting expectations is to talk about the repercussions and consequences that you being in a indefinitely hybridized role is going to have on the executive. Not you, but on the executive, right? Even though we're talking about you, let's put it in the language of them and how it's going to impact them. So for instance, if you're having to do 14 other jobs, it stands to follow that you're not going to be able to provide the same level of wonderful, attentive, deep, meaningful, enriching, strategic, thoughtful support if you're distracted with 13 other jobs, right? So I think it's teeing it up for the executive in a way of saying, the way that you and I work so successfully together, this is going to impede my ability to be that for you. And I don't think that that's a concession that you really want to make. And, are you prepared to be satisfied with less than, comprehensive support? And they just may not be understanding. They may not be understanding the strain that it's putting on you. I think that oftentimes executives don't realize all that goes into the incredible work that executive assistants do. So sometimes it's about spelling it out and putting it in that language. The other thing too is I think it's okay to say, I'm more than willing to do this on an interim basis. But the reality is, this is really a different job, right? Ultimately.
That's a great
is their budget. Yeah. And so I think, again, when you come across as flexible versus like that draconian, I'm inflexible kind of, I don't think that tends to land well, right? But if you come across as, here's how I can help. And not only that, but here's some other solutions I can come up with. Maybe we can engage a consultant for this. There's actually a tech solution that I think could solve these and these and these parts of this job that you're having me do. Is there budget for that? How can we work on that? So identifying solutions, identifying alternatives, and also being flexible to say, let me help put those things in place. Is there budget for this? Maybe it's, hey, I can run a search for so-and-so. Let me go ahead and take a stab at finding an office coordinator, or whatever the solution is going to be. But bringing solutions, not just voicing your discontent, but actually bringing solutions and talking about how ultimately it's in the executive's best interest. They also, by the way, don't want you to burn out. They're terrified of you burning out. And you need to sometimes let them know that I can't continue at this pace indefinitely. I can do this for a little bit, but ultimately I'm going to hit a wall. And I don't want that. I don't want it to compromise this relationship.
That's a great point. And I think I definitely, I love that you elaborated on that too, because in saying yes, and Kara, my first note on saying, yes, that comes with the territory. That's always going to be the environment of a startup. But to Jessica's point, that doesn't mean you have to do it all. It's most certainly not. And even in my role, with marketing and working at different startups, I've said that, like, yes, I know we need that. We absolutely need to do that. Is there budget? Or otherwise, this isn't going to get done because now I have to do this. And a good way to look at too is looking at what your OKRs, your objectives and key results, or your goals are. Does these other tasks plug into those? If not, then that's a good setup for that discussion that Jessica just walked through of, okay, here's how it's going to impact everything I'm doing because I measured on this. Or if you're executive, hey, your OKRs, what you're measured on are these 3 or whatever things. I support you with those in this way. I can't do that anymore if I'm, managing the logistics of the office instead of the logistics on how you're making the company successful.
Totally.
Yeah.
You're not a free for all. An executive assistant is not a free for all. And it's not a common resource, and it's definitely not the kitchen sink, right? Like it's not a garbage disposal kitchen sink. So sometimes I think there can be a temptation, particularly in smaller companies or startup companies where they're really resource constrained, to try and make it such. But it's a balance, and it's a balance.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple more questions. I want to get to anyone, but Ezzy just dropped a question in. And Ezzy, before we get to your question, you've been on Base Live before. My daughter's name is Evangeline, and we call her Ezzy, and I've never heard anyone else named Ezzy. And I keep seeing you at our Base Lives, and I'm like, I wonder what her full name is. So if you don't mind, I would love to know what your full name is so I can see what Ezzy's a nickname of. Okay.
Now I also think Evangeline is a beautiful name. What a beautiful name.
Thank you so much. It was so funny when we named her that. Even my parents were like, how do I was like, it's one of the oldest names ever.
It's so classic. It's just one of those classic, beautiful names.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. But as he said, so you're suggesting that the answer to setting expectations is saying, yes, I can, but what if you just don't want to do a particular thing? Can you say no, and how?
I would want to know what is the thing that they're absolutely saying no to. I mean, is it something that's just so completely left field that it just doesn't go together at all? Like, for instance, hi, sales are low, and so I'd also like you to start cold calling and doing cold business development. Like, that feels a little misplaced in an EA role. So without knowing the context of what Ezzy's talking about, I think it's a little hard to say. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also like you're not saying if you don't want to do it, even in any situation, you don't, when it comes to work, you don't be like, I don't want to do that. It's more of, doing this prevents me from doing my job.
I think
and
that's
it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a stronger answer. And I think too, it's part of going back to owning our value and being comfortable with that also does mean needing to at times say no. And I think that no is not necessarily an inappropriate answer. It kind of depends again on how you frame it and how you tee it up, and also what the ask is. Some executives can be very unreasonable in what they ask of people. And I would want to know, but I think that it's like, for instance, we had a candidate that we placed recently who her executive has purchased several homes during COVID. And now part of what she's doing is, in addition to managing all of their, personal estate, what stuff, she's got to get in her car and drive 3.5 hours each way a couple times a week to be on site to meet contractors and manage this, new house project that they've taken on. Well, that wasn't part of her original job. So it's not that and she reached out and said, how do I handle this? And our encouragement and thinking on this was not to say that, like, look, I'm unwilling to do this, but it's also, if I do this and I'm literally in the car for 7 hours, that's 7 hours of dead time where I'm not able to be doing other things. I can't make good use of that time. I'm not able to respond to things because I'm literally driving. So it's going to ultimately result in an impact on my performance in these other areas. So again, coming with a solution, what if we found, somebody locally who could handle the heavy lift that's locally based to that market, so I'm not driving back and forth. And so it's kind of thinking about and evaluating what the options are and what the alternatives might be. I think just a no without a solution or an alternative is probably not going to get you as much favor and the kind of response that you want as a no with an explanation and solutions.
Yeah, and it looks like, as he says, that she's supporting a certain committee, and it was someone else's job. So that's an easy saying, like, there was already a resource that did this outside of. So that's an easy one to say, hey, we can find budget for this and provide a solution.
And you also might be surprised that, as you might not want to support this committee, but there might be somebody within the organization who is looking for a leadership opportunity, who's looking for an opportunity to say, hey, I would actually love the experience of putting together an agenda, having an agenda item, having an agenda to run, having budget for this committee, having, kind of OKRs and key results that this committee is going to achieve. I want that experience. I think that's something that's really going to serve my career and bolster my credentials. So there could be somebody waiting in the wings that's all about that. And maybe in acknowledging that that's not you, it's going to also allow you to find that person and then tee that up for your executive. So you're saying, hey, I don't want this, but Mary does.
Right. Love that. Caitlin asked, how do you break into tech as an EA when you don't have any tech or startup experience? Great question.
That is the number one question. We do it all the time.
Yeah.
Not to toot our horn, but we do it all the time. And how do we do it? A lot of it is relationship based, right? It's being able to advocate for the people that we're representing. So it's from our perspective, it's a matter of knowing the client enough to be able to say, hey, we have this history together. We have this track record together. We have this credibility of bringing you phenomenal hires year over year. You need to trust me on this person, or this is somebody that you really need to give the opportunity to, and here's why. So a lot of it is, I think, finding somebody who can be an effective mouthpiece for you. I know it sounds self-serving given the type of role that we're in, but I can't tell you enough how important that advocate is in getting a company to open up their eyes. So many of the placements that we make, the initial response to their background is, no, thanks, I'll pass. And then it's when you pick up the call and you say, well, okay, and no is not an answer, and here's why you need to sit down with them. So that's so critical. But if you don't have an agency or a recruiter that you feel is available to do that for you, then I think a lot of it is framing. It's how do you frame yourself? How do you present yourself in terms of highlighting transferables, right? So one of the first things that I like to encourage is actually looking at the language of the organization that you're going to be a part of, right? How do they talk about the role in their job description? Actually analyzing the language. There's so much insight in that language, right? Do they talk about it in terms of like, we need somebody who wants to, jump on this rocket ship with us, high volume, intense, energetic, like, if that's the language of how they're talking, then you need to mimic that language. You need to demonstrate that you understand what the cultural priorities and norms are of being successful in their environment, and pepper your resume. Just think of your resume as an SEO document, and you want to search engine optimize for all of those keywords and just junk it up with that. I'll give you an example. I have a really good friend who's been a judge. She's wonderful, but she's been a judge in the California EEOC program for like 10, 15 years. And she wants to get into startup. And she's having the hardest time because nobody will take her seriously. They're like, you're a judge in California sitting on the bench. Like, you don't understand startup. You don't understand rapid change. You don't understand tech. And so I was prepping with her. And she was like, well, yeah, I do understand high volume. She's like, I have a caseload of, 1,000 cases in my docket. And I was like, do not use the word docket. You cannot, you are forbidden from using the word docket, right? Well, why? Because docket, it sounds like, that sounds like the most bureaucratic, like legalese, judicially kind of word you can think of. And the whole point is to be relatable, right? So it's about using language that is consistent with the language that your future employer speaks. The easiest way to be understood is to eliminate the translation that has to happen between two different cultures, right? So that's kind of like, I think, a super helpful thing to be doing. And then the transferables they're real, Maybe you haven't planned, I don't know, an all hands, summit, but you've done other types of events that you can highlight in the environment that you are in, and talk about that, and really try to frame yourself to talk about the experience that's important to them.
That's great. We have a couple questions that were written in beforehand. So I was going to get to some of those. I know we're running up. We have about 10-ish minutes left. So if you guys have questions, drop them in the chat. We'll just keep drilling Jessica here. You're doing great. Thank you so much. This one submitted said that my boss bases salary changes around the addition of consistent responsibilities. So expense reports, servicing clients, all that kind of stuff. But in their current role, they are assigned multiple short-term, high-priority projects that tend to be a bigger load than those consistent ones. How do they go about negotiating a salary increase when technically it's based on consistent projects, but they're assigned all of these short-term, high-priority projects?
Interesting. So I think it's about going back to the drawing board on the compensation plan and saying, hey, in the previous environment, my performance was conditioned upon my, ability to accomplish X, Y, and Z. The nature of my role has shifted due to the fact that I'm now handling not only X, Y, and Z, but also A, B, and C, which are short-term projects, which, absolutely require my expertise and take my time and my involvement, but they're not actually translated into how I'm currently being compensated. I think there's a disconnect in kind of the comp philosophy of how my comp package is working in conjunction with how my role has changed. So I'd like to revisit that with you. And I have, again, offering solutions. I have a couple of suggestions that I've come up with that I think could really help capture and create alignment between how I'm compensated and how my role has changed. It's
great. I love it. I while we have folks drop their questions into the chat, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the future of work and how leadership is supported. And I know that could be its own base live in itself.
Yeah.
At base, we really believe that every knowledge worker should have access to an assistant. And a lot of that is due to the point that you've made today, that a lot of leadership, they don't realize the leverage an assistant provide. I mean, it's just the strategic value an assistant can provide isn't known across the board when it comes to leadership. So how do you see, companies like Slack, they have their future forum now, and they're starting to talk about this a little bit, and how do we elevate support for all levels of management? How do you see this becoming mainstream in terms of what's happening now or what needs to be done in order to get this accelerated?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really important question. And I think that a lot of it comes down to education on both sides. So I think the work that you're doing, Liz, I think the work that BASE is doing, I think that there's a number of thought leaders in the space that are really advocating and articulating and bolstering, the sentiment around what EAs do. So I think that EAs really tapping into that and tapping into their value is a huge part of it. So I think that part of the education piece needs to be in terms of how do we empower our EAs, right? How do we empower them to speak about themselves in a way that allows people to really appreciate, how important they are. So many times we meet candidates and they say, we do these introductions and they sit there and they go, oh my God, like, can I bring you on the interview with me? Like, oh my God, you made me sound so good. And it's like, well, wait a minute, we didn't make you sound good. That's you. We didn't do anything. All we did is paraphrase what you've already been doing. So it's about connecting and getting comfortable speaking about what you do and owning that. That's part of the educational piece. The other part of the educational piece is educating the executives. And I think that in our work, I mean, that happens all the time. Some people have more of a implicit understanding, or maybe they've had more experience. Maybe they've had the luxury of working with a really great assistant, so they know and they get it. But more often than not, executives don't understand. And another example, like I was speaking with a first-time founder, a couple days ago, and she was mapping out the role. And I know accuracy of meetings is really important. I need to be able to trust my calendar. And I was like, okay, yeah, and what else? And what else? And what else? And we're talking, and she's like, oh, no, that's probably about it. And it was very clear to me that she didn't know what an EA could do for her. And I said, hold on. I said, do you not speak at, these international symposiums and conferences? And are you not like a sought after thought leader in your space? And do you not spend 3 months of the year traveling and giving talks and lectures and meeting with influencers and potential business stakeholders and partners? And she goes, well, yeah. I go, so don't you think if you had an EA that could do boom, 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 frame your talking points, get together your slide deck, make sure you were in the room with the right people at the right time, you all meet up in Zurich and you have drinks and you're closing deals and this and that. And she goes, her mouth drops and she's like, yeah, I want that. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that an EA could do that for me. So I think that it's about education, and, this role is so important. And I feel like for as long as I've been in this space, people have been saying, oh, this role is it's gonna be rendered obsolete by technology, or technology is gonna supplant this. And it's like, no, it's just not. It's not going anywhere, because when you really understand what an EA can do for you, how everybody wants that. Who wouldn't want that? I mean, literally, who wouldn't want that? It is a prototype.
Oops.
You're here.
There we are. Okay. We were frozen for just a second. We're back.
Oh, I'm going to kind of close out with it as EAs. I think you guys need to be thinking about two things too. And this is really boiling it down, but just to kind of boil it down to the most distilled thing. I think the essence of it is you need to be adding efficiency and leverage to your executive, and you need to be bringing some kind of joy or relief or, kind of positive support on an emotional level. I mean, if that's the right word, but I think that's what it really boils down to, is you've got to help them be more productive, help them achieve more leverage, and you've got to help them feel better, right? Because if you're doing one but not the other, if all you do is make them feel good, but they're not actually accomplishing anything more, they're not being more productive, they're not hitting their goals, like that's a friend, that's a therapist, it's whatever, but there's not, longevity in that, right? And on the flip side, if all you're doing is helping them kind of get to the next level, but they don't feel like they can let down their guard, they don't feel like they can have a moment where, they can come and just say, God, that was a tough meeting. God, that was hard to do. And you can kind of help bolster them up and shore them up and reassure them, that I think you're also not really fulfilling the most that you could be. So I think it's really about thinking about both of those things. And that to me is really kind of future proofing and ensuring that this role has longevity.
Thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. I think that the amount of advice and tips that you've provided just in this short hour has been some of the best advice that we provided our community here on Base Live. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to drink a sip of water. I think I earned a sip of water for that.
You earned a sip of water. Yeah, you do that while I do some plugs for you. I just dropped a link in the chat, guys, for Jessica's podcast, Reach. I saw there are a ton of listeners here today. If you haven't checked it out yet, there's the Apple podcast link. I will also send out the recap email with all of the other fun links where you can find Maven Recruiting on Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you have any other questions too, feel free to continue to drop them in the comments here, and we'll answer them as we can. I'll get Jessica any other questions. I know sometimes it's like as soon as we end, that's when you think of the question you were going to ask. So feel free to keep dropping those in. And thank you guys for all of the kind words. Jessica, I'll let you say thanks and do a little sound off before we wrap up here today.
Thank you all so much. This has been such a really fun. I have to say, I really enjoy these types of conversations. I enjoy the ability to share our passion for this role, for this community. We just feel so strongly and believe so strongly in how vital and wonderful executive assistants are. And we've heard the stories from our clients who just like sing their praises. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to share this and to share our enthusiasm for your craft. And yeah, definitely, we welcome as well. Write us, right? We have a number of links. If you have show topics, suggestions, questions that you want to hear about, things that you want us to delve into that we haven't, definitely, we'd love feedback. We're all about it. So thank you, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to connect with you today.
Awesome. And I have one more quick announcement, everyone. I'm very, very excited to announce that we are announcing our next summit, which is going to be June 9th. It is our OKR Alignment Summit, Objectives and Key Results. And we are hosting influencers in the space that have led this process at their organization, jumped into this process. We also have a consultant that specializes in OKRs who's going to be running a session, and I'm going to drop the link for that here in the comments too, so that way you guys can register for that. And Jessica, thank you again for joining us here today. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Bye, everybody.
Bye.